Good morning. Welcome to the Bible class hour, or less than an hour, of the Camelback Church of Christ. We are glad you are looking in and tuning in and seeking to find a little bit more about God's words. It's a great day here in Phoenix after being over 111 degrees for much of the week. We might not break more than 102 today, and we have wind. Problem with the wind at 40 miles an hour, it may fire up some of the brush fires we have around here, so your prayers about keeping that contained and watching out for those people who are fighting those would be really good, really appreciated. Our study continues what Jim started several weeks ago in the book of Mark. And today we're going to focus on a turning point in Jesus' ministry, as Mark writes about it here. If you will, you can turn to your Bibles to Mark the 8th chapter. And we're going to start sort of in the middle of it in verse 22. Now, throughout the book of Mark has been reporting on Jesus' emerging ministry, especially in Galilee, and all the things that he did, from picking disciples to driving out unclean spirits. Did a lot of healings, especially at Capernaum. Is really his circuit, if you use that word, where he preached was around Galilee. There he cleansed lepers. He healed people who had a hard time being healed. He fed people when there was really nothing to do on hand to feed them from, and that miracle is recorded. As he picked his apostles, his disciples, he started talking about to them in parables as a way to help them understand what this was all about. He drove out demons. He talked about the period of time and John the Baptist being beheaded, how John the Baptist preceded Jesus. Then we come to verse of chapter 8. And chapter 8 starts off with the feeding of the 4,000. Then it talks over in verses probably 11 and forward about the leaven of the Pharisees and Herod. But we're going to start in verse 22, sort of in the middle. They came to Bethsaida. We'll stop right there. This means they are leaving the region of Galilee, and in the verses following, what we're going to see is Jesus is taking his ministry and his disciples to that faithful time in Jerusalem. Why is this a big deal? Something else happens here. Jesus doesn't do as much, or it's not reporting that he's doing as much healing and as many miracles as he is focusing on teaching the disciples about the changes that are coming, the things that they're going to experience, the issues they're going to be involved in, and the things that are going to change their life and the course of the world. Think about the disciples are now leaving with Jesus the Galilee area. Just not leaving the area that they've been familiar and getting to know Jesus and the things that he's been doing. This is home. This is where Jesus recruited his disciples. Born there, probably all of them, family there, long-term traditions. The way they made their living, their livelihoods were there. Think of Peter and the others who were fishermen. And Jesus called them to be disciples and become fishers of men. So they're leaving the things that they know, the things that they have experienced. They're leaving their families. They're leaving their professions. And they're headed to that place, Jerusalem, where a lot of people don't want to go. There's a big Roman government presence there. Also the temple and the court officials of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, people that have already begun to question what is going on. It's not a familiar territory that they're headed to. And they're going to be in for some need for some teaching from Jesus. Verse 22, they came to Bethsaida. The Bethsaida is on the Sea of Galilee, about up in the northeast section. To get to it, they had to cross, or at least land in the boats on that side, and they are now on, quote, the other side, the eastern side of the Jordan River. They brought a blind man to him. They means probably a crowd, probably not the disciples, but they brought a blind man, and they begged Jesus to touch him. So this is the story of the recounting of how Jesus took the clay, how he mixed it with his own spit, how he got this man to see. And Jesus asked him, "Do you see anything?" And of course the blind man said something that's a little unusual. He said, "I see people. They look like trees walking." That sounds to me like he didn't exactly see everything, because then Jesus again placed his hands upon the blind man. And then the man saw. He saw everything clearly in verse 25, it tells us. Then he sent him home, saying, "Don't even go into the village." We'll tie that to some future verses here, some coming up verses. Why would Jesus do this and say, "Don't even go into the village"? In verse 27, some teaching really begins for Peter. Jesus went out with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. That is a Roman-built, improved town. It was given to the ruling sect of Judea. It's up in the mountains. So picture of the Sea of Galilee, and then over here is Bethsaida. I'm going to say 50 or 70 miles further north of that is where this city would be. It's high in the mountains. In fact, the mountains are going to come up over here in chapter 9. We'll talk about that and how this is probably an unfamiliar and uncomfortable area for some of the disciples. And on the road, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" They answered him, "John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others one of the prophets." Verse 29, but Jesus said, "Who do you say I am?" Well, Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And he strictly warned them to tell no one about him. Strictly warned them. In fact, the word strictly warned is the word that stands for muzzled, when he could just say, "Now, just don't tell anybody." But in essence, he has used a word that is so strong, it's a gag order. It is, don't, whatever you do, don't say anything about this. Why would he be so adamant that they not talk about the Messiah? Well, of course, Jesus knows what's going to happen. The disciples don't. In this teaching moment, he's letting them know they're going to a place to be prepared. When others hear the word Messiah, they're going to think of it in terms of the military leader, the person who is coming to be the king, who will throw the Romans out, who will restore the kingdom as it should be. He's preparing them for that. Verse 13, then he began to teach them, more teaching, and it was necessary for the Son of Man to suffer many things, be rejected by the elders, by the scribes, by the priest, to be killed, and to rise after 3 days. He spoke about this openly to them, and then Peter took him aside, and your Bible probably says he rebuked him, stood up to Jesus, took him aside, rebuked him for saying this. We already started off this section of the scriptures talking about how things have changed for the disciples, leaving their comfort zone, leaving their hometowns, leaving where they have been, leaving the places where crowds form to follow Jesus. And now they're headed to a place where they have now been told by Jesus, don't talk about this Messiah. Don't. So Peter's probably rebuking Jesus. We don't know what he says, but he didn't like what he heard, or otherwise he'd say, sure, no problem. He fought back on it. Maybe he didn't want to accept the reality that Jesus was just telling them that it will be necessary for the Son of God to be killed and rise after 3 days. But Jesus, turning around and looked at his disciples, he turned around, he rebuked Peter. He said, get behind me, Satan. And we've heard that before. The same words are used here, to get behind me, Satan, was what we saw during the temptation of Jesus in Matthew, the 4th chapter, and I think it's the 10th verse, where it was also rebuking Satan for trying to tempt Jesus. So Jesus equated this as using the same language that had been used to step back Satan, leave me alone. In verse 34, there's more teaching coming. Calling the crowd along with his disciples, he said to them, if anyone wants to follow after me, let him deny himself. Take up his cross and follow me. Let's focus on two things here. The cross. Take up his cross. People would have known what Jesus was saying. Most of the time, the way the Romans handled a crucifixion would be that the person to be crucified had to carry the crossbeam, this part of the cross, to the point of their execution. Another way to humiliate, another way to show that they had been totally subjected to the authority, that they had lost control of their life, as they're headed, no dignity will be allowed them as they head to this place. Let him deny himself. What does deny himself mean to us? Well, we can think of it in terms, deny ourselves of some things we like, deny ourselves of some pleasures that we enjoy, deny ourselves of leisure time, of things like that. But literally what this means is to deny himself means to not put yourself first, as we say so much today. Not make you the central subject of everything that happens in the world, but to just deny that you as the individual are going to be the same as you were before you met the Christ. It's just not going to happen. Hard for us in many quarters to accept this today. Let's use branding as an example. Many people, celebrities, social media stars, whatever they are, not only hire life coaches and agents and everything to get them exposure, oftentimes they trademark themselves. They go ahead and make themselves into a brand, and that's how they're going to monetize that. So this is a strong thing he's telling the crowd. You're going to have to put you last, take up your own cross, then follow me. If whoever wants to save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life because of me and the gospel will save it. For what does it benefit someone to gain the whole world, yet lose for his life? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes into the glory of his Father with the holy angels. That's a lot of information that was just put out there all at one time. If you look at what's coming up here, let's go into chapter 9. Then he said to them, truly I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the kingdom of God come to power. What do you think that meant to somebody who had just heard that? Some standing here is clarified over in chapter 8 in the same verse. I think it's the same chapter that we just finished, 12. Sighing deeply in his spirit, he said, "Why does this generation demand a sign? Truly I tell you, no sign will be given to this generation." Then he let them go back into the boat, and they went to the other side. Jesus is telling things are going to change for a lot of people. Another one of his teaching moments. Now we come to what's called the Transfiguration. After 6 days, I'm in verse 2 of chapter 9, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up to a high mountain by themselves to be alone. Now Mark spends a lot of time on this, more so than some of the other writers, the Transfiguration. He takes them up into a mountain. So where have they been? They were leaving the Sea of Galilee, that region. They were in Bethsaida, it's on the east side of the Jordan. And then they're headed to Caesarea Philippi, and that's up to the northeast, 50 or more miles away from Bethsaida. And now then they're headed up into the mountains. Now which one? Doesn't say here. Speculate. Could have been Mount Hermon, could have been Mount Tabor, could have been one of 2 or 3 mountains. There's some big mountains in this area. Some of the mountains here are over 9,000 feet high. So that's a change too. So Jesus has taken them there to be alone. Of all the people that would be in, quote, Jesus's inner circle, why Peter and James and John? Later on, there's even going to be arguments about which of these is the most important, who shall sit at the right hand of God. These were probably the strongest leaders that Jesus had. At least we heard more of them than the others. While they were on the mountain by themselves, Jesus transfigured in front of them. Transfigured is a word we probably ought to break down and try to understand what it says. Did he change shape? Well, no, they still recognized him as Jesus, and also they recognized Elijah and Moses. Now, how they did that, I don't know, but it had to be imparted to them in some way, because they wouldn't have been carrying around a photo of Elijah or Moses, hadn't been invented, or painting. Somehow they were new, and they were talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. Let us set up 3 shelters." That tells us something about Peter. Man of action. Things are going to happen. Struck for words, doesn't know maybe exactly what to say, but Peter says something needs to be done, thinks something needs to be done. So whatever the transfiguration is, it looked enough to Peter like people who needed shelter. 7, verse 7, a cloud appeared overshadowing them, and a voice came from the cloud, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." Hear him, some of your versions will say. Suddenly looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. As they were coming down from the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one. So this is the second time. It's actually the third time. Jesus has told the people around him, tell no one. The blind man that we first read about, tell no one. Telling the disciples about the Messiah, they are to tell no one. They are to remain muzzled about that. And now then, this probably shocking thing that these 3 men have seen, Jesus is telling them, tell no one, not even the other disciples. Well, they kept this word. And I guess it says here in 10 something that's also puzzling, questioning of what rising from the dead meant. They were talking to themselves. Then they asked him, why did the scribes say that Elijah must come first? Elijah does come first and restores all things. Why then is it written that the Son of Man must suffer? These are Jesus' words. Many things and be treated with contempt. He must suffer many things, be treated with contempt. I tell you, Elijah has come. And they did whatever they pleased to him, just as it is written about us. In this case, a lot of Bible scholars, and we could probably accept it as well, as what Jesus was talking about. Elijah has come. and that he's talking about John. First, John came. John came first. John baptized Jesus. John suffered the things that Jesus is going to suffer too in many ways. John was beheaded, but he was captured, found guilty, tried, convicted, and executed summarily. I think it's in verse 9, if we go back up there, in Mark's gospel here, we've already seen 3 times that Jesus has said, tell no one. This is an important teaching in Mark because I think there's 6 more times, a total of 9 times, that Jesus has used the phrase muzzled, tell no one. Verse 11, let's go to 12. Jesus teaching them that the Son of Man must suffer is picking up on the subject that Peter objected to over in chapter 8, verse 31. He didn't want to hear the part about the Son of Man will suffer, will be killed, and rise after 3 days. And Jesus rebuked him for that. And now then, he's hearing the Son of Man must suffer. It must be terrible for the men who have been with Jesus all this time and seen his glory, his power, maybe making assumptions that weren't true about what they thought he was going to do, such as be the Messiah who was going to restore things, instead of the Messiah who has come to prepare the world for a better way to get to God, the best way. We're going to go into verse 14, still in chapter 9. When they came to the disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and scribes disputing with them. When the whole crowd saw him, they were amazed and ran to greet him. He asked them, "What are you arguing about?" Remember, 3 are going to meet the others, and now the others are with a crowd. Someone from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought my son to you. He's a spirit. It makes him unable to speak. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him down." Sounds like a seizure, but it is an active spirit in this young man. I asked your disciples to drive it out, and they couldn't. Now, the disciples had been given powers. They had performed miracles. They were able to throw out demons, so why couldn't they do it this time? Well, Jesus, again, is going to give them some teaching about the time they are in now. He replied to them, "You unbelieving generation, how long will I be with you? How long I must put up with you? Bring him to me." That shows Jesus' exasperation with, you didn't learn what I taught you before. I'm going to teach you again. So they brought the boy to him, and when the spirit saw that he was in front of Jesus, what did the spirit do? Well, he immediately threw this child, this young man, into another convulsion. Jesus asked, "How long has this been going on? How long has this been happening?" Then finally Jesus asked, or was answered, "From childhood, and many times," this is the Father speaking, "he was thrown into fire or water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help it." Jesus said to him, "If you can." How's that? You've just asked Jesus. You've sought him out. You've just asked him to heal your son. I guess the man, is my belief, the man has had his faith shaken a little bit, whatever level he had. He had tried to get the disciples to heal. They were unable to. Tried to get them to get the demon, the spirit, out of this young man. They had failed at that. So now then he's saying to Jesus, "If you can." So Jesus turns right around and tells him, "If you can?" Question mark. Everything's possible for one who believes. And the father said, well, I do believe. Just help me with my unbelief. That's pretty telling right there. The father just said something that's very wise. How many of us can say, if asked, are you a believer? Absolutely. Are there some things you don't believe in or some things you have some questions about? Probably. It happens. We're humans. We're fallible. We don't get it all. We don't get it all right. We don't get it all right all the time. So he said, I do believe, but help me with my unbelief. At this point, Jesus rebukes the unclean spirit, says, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. I like that part. You can command the spirit to come out, but Jesus added to it, and never come into him again. I remember this from a tour of the Holy Land. Our leader and teacher on that was Dr. Chris Bullard. He's a minister of the Church of Christ and also a good teacher. And they came to the place where it's supposed to be Lazarus's tomb. It's been commercialized. Maybe it is Lazarus's tomb there in the Holy Land. It's got a sign outside that says it's Lazarus's tomb. And if you recall the scriptures there, Jesus said, Lazarus, come out. It was very specific. And when I heard it said like that, and I'm standing there, sort of a tingle went over me. I get it now. I get what that verse means. If Jesus had stood at the entrance where many people were buried and he said, come out, imagine a lot of people would have come out. He's very specific. Here he's being very specific too. Never enter him again. I think he did that for the teaching of the disciples. But here's going to come some more explanations, another teaching moment. We'll drop down to verse 29, still in chapter 9. And he told them, this kind, meaning that kind of spirit, can come out by nothing but prayer. That's a good lesson for us. Jesus is teaching the disciples what went wrong. Where was your prayer? Where was your faith? Did you have some unbelief like the Father had some unbelief? So prayer is appropriate in every enterprise that we enter into, everything that we're going to do, and everything we're going to ask that we think we need or want, or it's important in our life. I believe just like the Spirit could come out by nothing but prayer, nothing but prayer is going to get things done that we need in our lives. Now we go into another section here. Jesus is going to do some more teaching. In fact, he uses the word teaching here. Verse 30, then they left that place and made their way through Galilee, but he did not want anyone to know it. Again, keep it quiet. For he was teaching his disciples and telling them, the Son of Man is going to be betrayed. He's going to be given over into the hands of man. They will kill him. And after he is killed, he will rise. And then in verse 32, but they did not understand this statement, and they were afraid to ask him. I imagine they were afraid to ask him because doesn't this seem like this is a different Jesus than the one that they've been accustomed to, who was telling them parables and explaining everything to them, showing them the scriptures, showing what they needed to know about the scriptures. There was a lot that's different now than that Jesus that they had decided to follow. And now then, he's telling them most earth-shattering thing they've ever heard, and he's told them again, maybe for the third time in this section only here. The Son of Man is going to be killed, and he's going to rise. But they were afraid to ask him a fourth time. They were afraid to ask him again. They still didn't get it. So I have to wonder, what is it they're not getting here? They're not getting that this is truly the Messiah who is going to be bringing back the victory over death? Or do they want to still cling to the Messiah that they were probably raised up to believe that someday the Messiah will come? Someday that person will be here and set things right. And then we can get back to the life we had before the Romans took over this country of ours. We'll start again next week. Who is the greatest? It's going to be an argument, and then it says they came to Capernaum. So the journey's begun. Jesus is finished with his ministry in Galilee. They went to Bethsaida. From Bethsaida over on the northeast side, on the other side of the Jordan, they've gone up into the mountains. And now then, if they're in Capernaum, they've crossed back over the Jordan again. And that's the way, the west side of the Jordan, that's the way you get down to Jerusalem. And Jesus will continue his teaching in those next few chapters too. Well, thank you for being with us today. And we wish and pray for you the best. If you need prayer requests, it can still be done. Send us an email, drop us a postcard, call one of the elders, one of the ministers, call anybody you know. We'll arrange for you to get the prayers you need. Thank you.